defended the Black Lives Matter movement. One of the people who works for him was on a very different message. FBI Director James Comey on Friday added his name to the roster of law enforcement leaders, openly speculating that increased scrutiny on police is responsible for recent crime increases in some American cities.
I do have a strong sense that some part of the explanation is a chill wind that has blown through law enforcement over the last year.
Now, we've heard this idea before. It's called the so-called Ferguson effect. The idea that police officers around the country are so afraid of being caught in a viral video doing something they shouldn't be doing that they are just choosing not to prevent crime as much as they otherwise would. Of course, there's some essential problems, an empirical one with that theory. That is the utter lack of proof, something the FBI director himself noted.
The honest answer is I don't know. And I don't know that that explains it entirely. I think it's embarrassing, honestly, and ridiculous that we as a government don't have the data. Every single conversation about law enforcement and use of force, by definition, is uninformed. I cannot tell you whether shootings are up, down, or flat, because we don't have the data.
Joining me now from Columbia, South Carolina, Marquez Claxton, retired NYPD detective and director of the Black Law Enforcement Alliance. Marquez, this man works for the president. He was speaking at the president's former employer, the University of Chicago. He was speaking at one point to one of the president's former campaign strategists, and he seemed to directly undermine the president. Will he still be FBI director by Tuesday?
If it was up to me, no, but I'm sure he will be, because conveniently, a lot of times, some of the quote-unquote experts and high-level officials, have the ability to maneuver and kind of readjust, and by tomorrow, he'll be further explaining what his rationale and reasoning was. So it's disappointing, and I think what he spoke about and what's been regarded as the Ferguson effect, it really is an examination of the lack of initiative and know-how in law enforcement. They can't put their fingers on what is driving some of the crime increases throughout the nation, and because they lack innovative thinkers and initiative and new ideas, they're just blaming it on police apathy, if you will. Any professional police officer who would be apathetic in the face of crime, and not necessarily crime increase, but crime in general, should not be a police officer, and that is the bottom line.
Stick with us, except one of the things that seems so odd to me about this is, Comey has actually been relatively good on some of these issues, in his discourse previously, but it's specifically him saying, we don't have the data, I just have a feeling about it. And so I'm wondering about, Patrick, how we intervene by saying, no, actually, you just can't make those sorts of claims unless you have data.
Yeah, this has been, the fact that we don't have the data, actually, one thing I'll agree with him, is incredible. Yeah. That these things haven't been collected. We're starting to look at things, there's enough of it out there if it gets collated, because these seem to be anecdotal incidents that happen, that get noticed specifically because of the context of other things that are going on in the world. Interesting things that one thing we do know about is the racial disparity in people who are being stopped by police for different things, whether it's just as simple as a traffic ticket. Yep. And one of the things that I actually included on a poll in addition to that was what's the flip side of that? How many people have felt that police have gone out of their way to help them?
Interesting.
And we don't see as big of a disparity in that, which suggests that this is not just something that African Americans or Latinos are reporting because they want to get police into trouble. This is something that is really happening on their side. So then the question is, on the flip side, are they actually going out there? The numbers don't seem high enough to claim that there's some sort of statistical correlation.
Well, and to the extent that there are data, we were looking at the law enforcement officer fatalities. Every fatality is of someone in the line of their job is awful. We do, of course, see that there is an uptick, but between 2014 and 2015, but that uptick is from traffic accidents. It's from the dangerous jobs that officers do, often chasing folks in circumstances. And so traffic fatalities are actually not shootings. Compare that to what we know in St. Louis itself and in the St. Louis area, where the uptick in violent crime precedes Ferguson, not follows it. So anything that happens before something, after something, can't cause what happened before it.
Right, and not only that, but you have now data that's being collected by, people like the Washington Post and that are starting to collate the number of fatal encounters between police and civilians, the racial disparity in that, the racial disparity in just things like ticketing and traffic tickets, and the way that those things are being used to fund communities that we saw in places like Ferguson that we're seeing in states. So we see that empirical data, and we also see the anecdotal data of police unions just not liking to hear about that data and not liking to hear about things like Black Lives Matter and being annoyed by mayors like Bill de Blasio actually saying that police probably ought not to be engaging in fatal encounters from a traffic stop or from somebody selling Lucy cigarettes. So if you just look at the data that there is, it all leads toward really what the libertarian sort of end of the argument is that perhaps the problem is too much interaction for low-level offenses, and that maybe what we need is not more immersion of police into communities, but maybe less, and that the more encounters there are, because they are disproportionately traffic stops and because they are disproportionately focused on communities of color, that maybe that actually is the problem, and that because the police unions have an attitude about it, that doesn't mean that there's some sort of statistical correlation between the movement and police not being able to fight crime.
I'm going to take a quick break. We're going to get you back in, Maria, on the very next one, I promise, because up next, the attorney for the family of the Florida man killed by a plainclothes police officer. Stay with us.